Good morning, everyone. So thank you very much, Budin, for the introduction. I'm going to set the stage for the conversation we are going to have this morning around kind of the internal and organizational transformation, just with a little bit of backdrop on where we are in the movement of organizational learning and change, and where we are in the movement of systems thinking. So we all heard, probably most of us, the introductory session, right? The backdrop, where we are from the viewpoint of systems thinking. And we all know we live in an era of rupture, not transition. We live in an era of fracture, not fragmentation. And we also live in an era of beginning profound renewal. And what we heard in the introductory session is the bigger backdrop of the planetary situation we are in. And when you look at the current situation through the viewpoint of systems thinking, here's what we see. We collectively create results that pretty much no one wants. What are these results? They are like the symptoms of the poly crisis are: 1, the environmental, 7 of 9 planetary boundaries crossed. We also heard in the introductory session about fragmentation, polarization, and war. And of course, then there is the inner divide, which is the pandemic of mental health, the collective sense of depression that we face in many situations. And that one way of describing is in terms of deal with the illusion of insignificance, the feeling that all these problems that we face, that's so big, whatever I do or can't do doesn't make any difference on that. 2 numbers on that: 69% of people have reported about a significant loss of agency. 2 out of 3 people worldwide say, what happens in my institution, what happens in my community has nothing to do with my own voice. And yet, pretty much the same number of people also say, I want to be part of a positive change story. I would be willing to sacrifice part of my personal income to combat climate change. And when you look at these 2 numbers, that's in a nutshell the challenge we face in organizations. There is an abundance of positive personal intention, and yet collectively there's this feeling whatever happens around me has nothing to do with what I want to see. That is the face of collective leadership failure today. That's the challenge that we all face. So let me double click on that, and I want to give you 3 numbers that we want to keep in mind as the backdrop of this conversation here this morning. The first one you very likely already know: 70%. 70% of organizational transformations fail, right? That has been often reported, and we all know the examples of that. Imagine a company that is rolling out a product that 7 out of 10 times is failing, right? Imagine what we would do. But this is what we do as leaders. This is what we do in the leadership of change. Now, so let's double click on that one. The second number is 6% of US workers strongly agree with 4 key items predictive of effective change management. 1, the supervisor actively supports the changes. 2, communication is open across all levels. 3, they are asked for input. And lastly, leaders help them to see how the changes shape the future. So the last number is about these 4 items. When these 4 conditions are met, 77% of employees are engaged. when these conditions are not met, 1% of employees are engaged. So it really boils down to these 4 very simple, straightforward things. Whether we can meet the conditions for that to be in place. Now, what does that mean from a systems thinking perspective? It means that most of organizational change is dealing with the top level, the symptoms level, right? We address one gap or the other. And all the changes we really, we usually do is to taking out costs, to streamline processes, and maybe kind of merging kind of 2 units into one or something structural, right, on a big picture. What is it? So there is kind of the deficit mindset in most of our organizational change initiatives, closing the gap, and the changes are kind of limited to structures and processes. What we are missing is the 2 deeper levels of organizational change, which really deal with the deeper mindsets and the deeper sources, right? Sources of our identity, of our creativity, but also sources of our story of the future that we feel perhaps being part of or not being part of. What we have learned in the field of deep change at the Presencing Institute over the past 2+ decades, the past 25 years, are these 4 things that essentially deal with the interplay among all 4 levels you see here. 1, you cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness, which means you cannot change a system unless you transform the mindsets of the people who are enacting that system. So you need to address all 4 of these levels. 2, you cannot transform consciousness unless you make a system see and sense itself. You need to create an environment where you look into the mirror, where you look at what you see in terms of the outcomes you don't want to see as a result of your own behavior, kind of these reflective environments. 3, you cannot actualize the future unless you're sensing and embodying the change. Be the change you want to see, right? We know that term. So as a leader, we need to not only feel the future, but we need to embody it to a degree that it really radiates into our teams. And lastly, you cannot do any of these things unless you create support structures that offer tools, practices, and holding spaces. That is really the #1 learning from change management. All leaders can change you what change they want to see, but what they often don't know is the support structure that they need to provide for these behavioral changes to occur. And this is all about spaces, tools, and practices. So perhaps the most important thing that I learned over the years from innovators is this. There are 2 sources of learning and leadership. One is the past, and the other one is the future, the emerging future. And pretty much all our organizational processes, organizational learning processes, and education processes are based on the first source of learning, the past. Yet, when we deal with disruption, when we deal with the leadership situations we all face today in our organizations, we need to tap into this other source. And that really became my quest. And what I learned is, and what I mean with emerging future is a possibility that looks at me, that looks at us, because it depends on us to manifest. It's kind of that sense of a possibility that needs my own agency to actually be realized, which is really at the source of all great entrepreneurship. So what I learned, how that works is, it takes a journey that moves us beyond the usual mental frameworks, right? Downloading the existing frames and taking us through a journey of basically 3 stages: observe, 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 deepening our observation capacities, accessing a deeper source of stillness, right? Deep sensing, something we call presencing, and then exploring new possibilities by doing. Today, I would summarize this same process with just 3 words: attention, intention, and agency. Attention. If truly deepened, the way we are present and attending to what's happening around us, if truly deepened, allows us to connect with intention, with the deeper sense of the story of the future that we want to be part of. And intention, why we are here, the sense of why we are here, if truly clarified, begins to catalyze agency. That's really what I learned. And what that means is that there is an inner dimension of leadership that in most change efforts today is missing. And I stumbled into that by, talking with leaders like this one here, Bill O'Brien, and he told me, reflecting on all his experiences, that the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. So he basically says, the success of what we do depends on the inner place from that we operate. And when I heard that, I realized he wasn't just talking about what leaders do or how they do it, but about the inner place from which they operate. And today, I would describe this inner place with these 3 conditions: open will, open mind, and open heart. And so, in other words, our capacity to access curiosity, to access empathy, and to access courage. And of course, what we all know is, very often, these conditions are not met, right? So what we have been seeing over the past 10 years is an institutional wall where we see a lot of the opposite. A closing reaction, a freeze reaction of the mind, heart, will, AKA an amplification of ignorance, hate, and fear. We see those patterns of denial, of desensing, and of absencing, both in business models, right, and also in geopolitics, playing out as we speak. So what I'm basically saying is, when disruption happens, we have a choice as leaders. We can respond by turning towards, or we can respond by turning away and closing down, or by opening up and turning towards. When we close down and turn away, we activate one kind of process that by now we all know very well. And when we turn toward and open up, we activate another kind of process that, through our own experiences, we also know very well. And the first one is really organized on a pattern of an architecture of separation, right? Which is kind of all the walls are going up, and that's kind of the wall of rupture and fracture. And the second one, which is also real for many of us, is based on an architecture of connection that is operating on opening the mind, the heart, the will, kind of doing this inner kind of leadership work. And yet, we as leaders today are part of both of these walls. We lead in a world that has the patterns of absencing, and also is enacting these realities of presencing, of co-creating new realities. As leaders, we need to be bilingual. We need to be able to operate in both of these worlds. How do we do that? And I want to end with that. And I want to name you 3 conditions that I believe are at the core of being functional in both of these worlds. The first one, and they deal with 3 things that in current management education and in current leadership education and models are underrated versus 2 things that are overrated, 3 things that are overrated. The first thing underrated is access your not knowing, which is all about listening and accessing your humility. The second thing that is underrated is accessing your discomfort, leaning into your discomfort. For example, listening to stuff you really don't want to hear. How good are you as a leader to listen to information you don't want to hear? So that is essentially about emotional resilience, about connecting with realities that are challenging, and yet you keep kind of connecting to that. You allow that to talk to you. And we all know that's critical in this current moment to move beyond the edges of our comfort zone. And lastly, the capacity to lean into our non-reactive ways of behaving. Because if we move to action right away, we are just being reactive in a situation. So that is to say, leaning into our capacity of stillness as a gateway to the deeper levels of our creativity. So today, to close with that, you see on the left-hand side 3 things underrated: not knowing, leaning into not knowing, leaning into discomfort, and leaning into non-action, aka stillness. And they need to be rebalanced with the 3 things that are overrated today. Knowledge, because no one knows about the future. There's very important things we don't know about the future. Comfort and action, particularly the talk about action and the reactive patterns. Of course, we are interested in action, but non-action, kind of the capacity to lean into the sources of stillness as the foundation of deep creativity, is, in the age of AI, more important than ever, to allow us to move beyond reactive patterns, which too often we see today. With that, I want to, so that's kind of my little provocation from a systems thinking perspective for the panel conversation that we are going to see now. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, Otto.